All right. So back again with another episode of Streaking with Friends. And as a reminder, the idea of this podcast is to help each guest become more comfortable with their own story and become more comfortable with sharing their story so they might inspire others to do the same. And we are so fortunate today to have a guest that is a great friend of mine, one of my longest friends in life. And I've not heard a lot of his story, but I'm excited to learn about it today. I'm familiar with some of it, but a lot of this I'm going to be learning for the first time with you. So, uh, Karl, welcome.
Thanks for having me, man. It's humbling to be on with you.
Well, dude, I'm more than excited, man. I mean it. I look forward to it. So like I mentioned, there's a mental health element to what I hope to do with this. There's, kind of a courage element and a vulnerability element to heal and let people kind of see what it looks like to process things that might be difficult at times. Just what I know of your story, I know that you've experienced some stuff like most of us have. But I want to just kind of open it up for you and let you start wherever you feel like is important. But tell us a little bit about yourself, man.
Awesome. Once again, dude, thanks for having me. It's super humbling to just to be on this platform with you. I mean, we've known each other since seventh grade, been through a whole lot together. So it's kind of neat to kind of share this space with you and also just to share a little bit more about my story with you, man. I mean, we've reconnected, the last couple of years, and I've got to share a lot with you on our runs but never really got to dig in a little bit deeper to kind of my life and my life in recovery. And so, I mean, like, I'm from Slidell. For the people that don't know about Slidell, it's a small little town kind of north of New Orleans. It's about 30 minutes north of New Orleans, just across Lake Pontchartrain. Growing up in small town Slidell was, there wasn't a whole lot to do. A lot of other places in the world have great outdoor activities. They have a lot more. They're kind of like more well-rounded towards youth. They have, you go to the mountains. You have skiing. You have kayaking. You have a lot more things that kind of encourage healthy growth and healthy youth activities. But Slidell had some of that stuff. I mean, Southern Louisiana has fishing and stuff, but kind of wasn't my story. I mean, I have couple siblings. I have an older brother and younger sister. I'm in the middle. I was born on April Fool's Day, and
The irony of that, huh?
I tell you, so I always felt like I was like a kind of a natural born fool, but I felt like I was a good kid. You know what I mean? I was brought up in I would say, a pretty decent home in hindsight. I've worked in mental health for years, so I've gotten to have a much better perspective of what like true agony is growing up as a child in a very abusive home. That just wasn't really truly my story. I mean, it was a struggle. My dad worked two jobs and went to school, after he got home. And so he was never really around, but he tried to make the best of it. And, when he had time, he'd play basketball and stuff with us and take him camping. He did more than most parents, I think. My mom was kind of a stay-at-home mom and cooked, and so like I'm saying, it was a pretty decent upbringing. I went to private schools, and I transferred schools. I was starting off in a Baptist school in Slidell, and then I switched to a Catholic school. It was kind of like a big shock. And even at that age, I was kind of dumbfounded by the fact that it was so different. Because as a child, you don't really know much about the differences in God's or religion, and so like that transformation from a Baptist school and being raised Baptist, Southern Baptist, to a Catholic school, it was like I felt like such an outcast. You
Right.
know, I met you and I met some great friends, and felt like I emerged pretty well into Our Lady of Lourdes. But some of the kids there were definitely into drugs, even in seventh grade, and by eighth grade, I was kind of dabbling in drugs. And high school. I begged my parents. I wanted to go to the high school you went to. And I wanted to play sports, but they wanted me to go to this private Catholic school. And it's funny because I have a long history in Slidell, and my family actually, their name is with that school, and they donate money to that school. And but they didn't want me going there,
Yeah.
and so they
That
sent
is
me.
interesting. Have you ever spent any time with them or asked them about it after the fact, or do you know now why they might not have wanted you to go there?
They just always thought I was going to get in trouble there. Little did they know it would have been probably better for me. I mean,
Right.
I feel like I probably would have been more involved with sports, and all the people that I went to school with Our Lady of Lourdes. And even though a lot of them went to Pope, a lot of them went to South. And, I kind of resented my parents for that. Resented them pretty greatly. And it's such a perspective thing, getting older and looking back at my parents. I mean, I just love them to death. I mean, I do now. I mean, I love them, and I love the decisions and the morals and values and stuff they tried to instill in me, even though I was just a rebel. And, that Pope was good for me in some like aspects. I played sports there. I got into sports, and even though I was starting to dabble, pretty heavily into drugs, they started drug testing. So I shaved my head, and eventually that year they started drug testing. I ended up leaving, and I left and went to North Shore. And going to North Shore was, I would say, probably a pretty huge mistake. Also, backing up, that year before I left, I broke my arm pretty severely in a football accident, which gave me like full reign to just use. I was
Hmm.
taking pain pills and showing up to school, super loaded, like passing out in class, and the teachers were kind of just letting it be because they were at the game, so they saw me break my arm. So everything was it was okay, I guess, in their eyes. And, but like I said, so leaving Pope and going to North Shore I just started to run kind of full speed, and things picked up pretty heavily. And, all my using picked up real heavy. And I felt like I kind of tried to keep it under wraps. I wanted to still, like I say, be a good kid, and in some aspects of my parents' view. I wanted to show up for them and make good grades. And, like I've always wanted to be a good kid. I really have deeply. I think all of us like want to make people proud.
Sure.
Stuff.
Yeah. That's a human condition for sure.
Yeah. Like I want to make my parents proud, and so even though I also wanted to get, fucked up.
Yeah.
So I was trying to do the best of both worlds. And, like I said, I continued on. I graduated high school, continued using. It got worse. I had like a pretty traumatic event. A buddy of mine, a close friend of mine, childhood friend, he got shot right in front of me with a shotgun. And it's something, I tell you, for people that haven't seen someone get shot, and to hear like the sounds and the smells, and to have like blood and guts on your face, and like have blood all over your hands from like trying to like stop the blood.
Yeah,
Like,
I couldn't imagine.
yeah, I'm grateful for the experience now, because I didn't know how much it transformed me, and kind of like I've come to know that some of the worst things that ever happened to me end up being the best things that ever happened to me.
It's
And
such a
it was
good,
that,
dude, that's such a good point.
yeah.
So I was familiar with that. I was familiar with that incident at a distance, but you and I have never really talked about it. Like, do you feel like now, and again, obviously I recognize that you're well down the road, right? I mean, that happened what, 10 plus years ago, 15 years ago?
Probably almost 20, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, now
So a long time ago,
18.
but either way, I'm sure a lot of it you still carry a good bit with you, but at the same time too, I'm sure in a certain way, equipped with all the skills that you have now, I'm sure you've processed it in as healthy of a way as you can. So do you want to maybe go a little deeper into that? Like, how did you originally feel? What were some of the emotions that you had at that time? Tell us a little bit about that.
So like the time of the event, the feelings of,
Yeah.
yeah, I'll tell
Yeah. So
you, it's,
you see your buddy get shot. You're with him. What happened? What happens after that?
I mean, he gets shot where there was a group of us standing there, and this guy runs out with a shotgun, points the gun at one of my friend's head. My buddy who got shot grabs the gun. It hits him in the stomach. Immediately, I had basically a hoodie just like this on. I took my hoodie off real quick, stuck it in his side, got him to the car. He had was like basically laying in my lap while I was like holding this sweater inside of him. I was like, trying to like make sure he's conscious. I guess I'd seen a couple cop shows. I don't know why. Are you stay with us, man. Like,
Right.
stay
Right.
conscious, keep breathing. And of course, like, this dude's such like a comedian, and he's like, he looks up at me. Yeah, of course he's in shock. He's like, getting cold, man. I'm like, shut the fuck up. Like, this is not a time to be joking. This is not funny. And so
And
we
he
get to
meant it entirely as a joke. Like he
totally
was.
joking. I mean, he was totally joking, but I mean, he was in so much shock, he probably didn't even, and he really didn't feel much of anything. I mean, it was such a crazy moment because, like, when it happened, he was like, "Fuck, I've been shot," and everybody was just like in total shock. Nobody knew, like, if he was going to live, or we, got to the car, drove to the hospital as fast as we could. And something that always really stuck with me was I had to call his parents,
Mm.
and his dad was out of the country. So his mom answers the phone, and I was just like, "Miss Beth, David's been shot." And like her voice, man, she like let out this scream, and it like haunted me for years, and the funny thing about using drugs is it does like kind of, it forces everything down, but it never actually heals anything.
Hmm.
So it's like a lot of people use drugs to like self-medicate, but like, fast forward, kind of getting into recovery, all of it came back up. I mean, I was like writing, and journaling and doing the process of like some step work and stuff. And I mean, it just was all there again. It was like fresh. But I mean, I didn't smell gunpowder. I did that for a while. I'd wake up and have dreams where I would like literally could smell gunpowder.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So like for a couple of years after that happened, of course, like my parents, God bless them, they don't know. I mean, they didn't understand, like it's known now, like to have trauma therapy, to, hey, like this was a very traumatic event for my kid. He should probably have some sort of therapy.
Right.
They were just like, I'm glad you made it, bud, go back to school.
Glad it wasn't you. Go back.
Meanwhile, I'm like going to my buddy's house. We're getting loaded every day, and they have to peel. Like, so he was missing a complete. It's a miracle he lived. I mean, it was like an inch basically off of his side, and it was completely his whole side of his stomach was just gone. So they had to like have this plastic bag over him with a
Mm.
vacuum that like sucked fluids out, and they had to pull it off every day. They pulled it off every single day, washed out the wound, dressed it again, and put this like vacuum over it. It's like plastic wrap. And it was just like the craziest thing to watch this go down every day. And
So bro had a saran wrap around his abdomen for how long was that?
like 6 months until they
Damn.
started doing skin grafts and stuff like that. He's had like maybe 20 surgeries on it, but now you can't even see it. It's actually pretty amazing. They did a bunch of skin grafts, and then eventually they like did one where they stretched the skin to where it's basically just one line. It's like the line goes all the way from basically below his belly button to like around his hip, his waistline, to
Mhm.
basically his middle of his back. That's it. I mean, it's actually, he's still missing a lot of his obliques, but it didn't nick any major arteries. They said he would bleed out before he even got there. So imagine, 19 or 20-year-olds kind of going through that and living through that. He started going to rehab basically pretty close after that. Maybe like within a year or two, he was, starting to go to treatment centers, and he was really kind of out there. We all were. We all kind of struggled. Everybody was there, and I've had a wild experience, and I know this is jumping ahead, but I'll share it with you. I was working with this company doing wraparound, and I'm sitting there one day doing this meeting with a family and therapist, and this mom and this kid. We're talking about trauma, and the kid's like asking me about trauma in my life, and so I say, yeah, I saw a kid, one of my closest friends get shot right in front of me, and the mom, like, I watch her facial expression and look over at her, and she's like just staring at me, and I'm like, she goes, "Was your friend David?" His name's David Strang, and I was like, "Yeah." She goes, "Yeah, my brother shot." I was like, "Wow." But granted, by this time I'd done a lot of work. I kind of
No way.
yeah. So my immediate question was, how's he doing? Is he okay from that experience? Because like through growth, you begin to understand that also had to be pretty traumatic for him.
Sure.
She went on to tell me that, her brother was in recovery and he had a couple years and he was doing well and he was married and he had a little kid now. So there was also another guy there that was there, like, the guy that shot his friend, who I knew from high school. And, we had a long conversation and shared about perspectives, like I shared with him what it was like being, going to the hospital, and he was sharing what it was like to be in the house with the guy who just shot. So it was kind of, the gifts of staying alive long enough to mend those things. It's really a blessing. I
Man,
don't
that's
know.
incredible that you were able to somewhat close that wound a little bit, right? I mean, that's pretty crazy. I mean, how often does that happen where you're able to heal it essentially?
Yeah. I mean, I didn't heal for a long time. I can promise you that. I used a lot of drugs, and most people that know me, I don't think they really know how much drugs I used. I mean, I got into pain pills and Oxycontins before I was 20. I mean, I was smoking crack before I was 20. And that guy who got shot, his dad was the judge, as you know. And of course, I never got in trouble because my closest friend was, his dad was the judge.
Right.
So when we got pulled over, if I got pulled over, I got in trouble. I mean, the only time I ever almost got in trouble, I was living in Hattiesburg. I had just withdrew and basically dropped out of college at Nicholls State and moved to Hattiesburg and caught a felony with a bunch of drugs and a handgun. And I almost didn't get out of that either, but like I said, I come from and that word thrown around, a lot of people don't like it, but it was kind of privileged, It's not many people that have parents that would be willing to throw $10,000 to get you out of a felony,
Yeah.
and to fight for you. And my dad, thank God he did that, because I couldn't have a lot of the jobs that I've had. I couldn't have that if I had a felony on my record. And if I'd have had all the DWIs I was supposed to have, or possession charges, or speeding tickets. I mean, it's amazing, and I feel blessed now having gone all the way through it and to not have such a tarnished record.
Yeah.
It's amazing that I didn't. I mean, that guy David, I was telling a story the other day. We were driving across the Twin Span. One night we had been out in the city partying all night long. I guess I was probably like maybe 22, and he was like, "Let's see how fast it can go." So I'm like pegged out. The governor's kicked in. I'm doing 99. This is after Katrina, so it's 50 on the Twin Span. And state trooper pulls me over, and I was able to like kind of talk my way out of it, but he gave me a ticket for a 99 and a 50. And his dad, so his get home and he's like, "Yeah, just leave the ticket on the table." He calls me the next day. He's furious. He's like, "You look, first off, I know y'all were probably fucked up. You know, second off, you got my kid. Carl, I put people in jail for 20 over. You're doing 40 over. Like, I don't even know if I can fix this." Like, but he, talked to me in a couple of days, told me to go to a substation and, Pearl River and pay a seatbelt ticket, basically, times were different, man. I mean, it just, you couldn't, in those days, like I really couldn't get in trouble. I was enabled almost to death. And there's so many more instances. I mean, that's just like one little example. I mean, as many times as we got pulled over and had drugs and was drinking and driving and hell raising. But like I said, a lot of people don't know how much drugs I actually used, And I had some success. I finally graduated college for like 8 years.
Dude, I mean, it's a feat in itself just to finish whether you're using or not. That's a big deal, man.
Yeah. Yeah. And at that time I was trying to clean up my act. I got on a maintenance drug called Suboxone. I was like maybe I was bad off then. A buddy of mine, he's dead now, Steve Bradford. We were ordering pills from like Saudi Arabia, like Oxycontins through the internet, and like Xanaxes through the internet. It's just a crazy time. I mean, like this dude was a genius on the internet. I mean, at that time, they basically had this eBay online drugs. It was called Silk Road. And so at that time, if I'd invested in Bitcoin, I'd be a millionaire. But this dude, he was a genius. And he said, "Dude, you should invest in this stuff called Bitcoin. I buy drugs with it. And
No
back then it
kidding.
was like $100 a coin. It was like nothing. And nobody bought it. And he had a bunch of Bitcoin. And he used Bitcoin because it was untraceable, and he'd buy drugs through Silk Road.
No kidding.
Yeah, so around that time I was really bad off. I was in school. I think I had just moved back to New Orleans after Hattiesburg. And like I said, I was trying to straighten up. I was completely falling apart. I had caught that felony. I'd moved back from Hattiesburg to New Orleans. I was trying to get back in school. I went and got on Suboxone. Didn't know much about it other than like just some people I knew. That's how they stopped using drugs. I didn't know anything about, maintenance drugs or whatever. So I went to this doctor and got on Suboxone. I was on it for like, about 2 years, and actually graduated college. I was using all kinds of steroids and stuff too at the time, like a kind of a good addict.
What were some of the symptoms or side effects of all the steroids?
I mean, at that time, there wasn't like a whole lot of real negative side effects other than I think I was like so kind of maybe asleep of the world, really, like that I didn't have the awareness like I do now. But I mean, I definitely had some like testosterone side effects, sexual stuff. I stayed on steroids for a long time, even after I wasn't working out anymore, just to make sure that I had some sort of sexual stamina. And of course, like that went away. I mean, they have some drugs that can help you bounce back, but I was like strung out on heroin again. Like once I got off Suboxone, I continued taking steroids. I was like using heroin again. Lost my job. I had gotten this like pretty good job. I was working Canal Place in downtown New Orleans, and I was like selling, advertising and stuff like that for auto dealerships around the country, and was making pretty good money. I remember running into you at some point.
I do. I remember one of those interactions. You were doing pretty well, at least on the surface.
Yeah, on the surface, but I was starting to run wild. They had a big parking lot where we parked, and I can remember smoking crack in there and like, going into my office and like doing drugs in my office. And eventually, they basically fired me. I mean, they were like, "You can't be in the office anymore. You can go on the road. If you want to work on the road, go on the road, but you're not working in the office anymore. You just get too loaded." And it was slipping. You know what I mean? I didn't have anything against him. I still talk to these guys. We're still friends.
But didn't you? But I mean, it wasn't the healthiest environment though either, right? I mean, it's not like you were
No,
the only one using, right?
no. I mean, the car business is it's a crazy business. It's a very lucrative business. It's a fast money business, especially the kind of sales they were doing. So this company would go around all over the country, and basically they would send out a bunch of mail. I mean, I'm sure people have gotten flyers. They don't do it like this anymore. Basically, it's done social media, Facebook. It's targeted, much more targeted advertising now. But back then, they would send out flyers to different area codes and try to drive traffic into the dealerships. And what the company would do is they'd send in a whole sales team, a finance team, and sell as many cars as they could. So at that time, it just
In what, a week or a weekend or what?
Yeah, weekend mainly, like 3-4 days. They'd sell anywhere from like 50 to like, I mean, they had some sales that were like almost 200 cars in a weekend, and it would be like $1 million. So of course I would get 5% of that. So I got a contract with a guy that started off in Ohio, just from cold calling. Got this one client in Ohio at a dealership, and I'm not going to say the dealership name, but
Yeah.
so I got in with this used car dealership, and it was a big dealership. They wouldn't let us do a sale or anything, but they let us do mail. So I started doing mail with them like every month, like 100,000 pieces of mail every single month. And then it worked so well for them. They were just, they were turning all their ups themselves and converting customers. And they eventually, I talked them into letting them get me into some other dealerships. And then there was like 20 dealerships up there. So every single month we were running mail, and then eventually we were doing sales at some of the dealerships. But just to give you like an idea of what kind of people, I mean, one of the guys that was a salesman on one of these teams, was loaded, stole a car from the dealership, crashed it, like hurt some people. I mean, it's just the car business is crazy. I mean, it just is. Like if you've never worked in the car business, you just don't even don't even understand. I don't know if it's like that anymore. This, of course, is like, over 10 years ago now. It
So
was wild.
I've never worked in the car business, but it does have that bit of a reputation, I guess, to where, you know, kind of do anything to make the deal work or do anything to make it happen. And they run kind of wild, but I
It
don't
was
have any
fun.
personal experience.
I had fun. I had a lot of fun. I met a lot of great people. I still talk to some of these guys that I sold mail to every now and then. Some of them will like hit me up. It's kind of fun to catch up with them. When they come in New Orleans sometimes, like I'll go have lunch with them, like old clients and stuff. But after I left, after I got fired from that job, basically, it was bad. I mean, it really, my life got real dark. I didn't work anymore. I lost my apartment, moved in with this stripper, and just basically, I was selling steroids still. I was still selling drugs, selling steroids, but basically, she was just like paying everything, you know. God bless her. And it was just dark, man. It was dark for a long, long time. It was really dark.
You exchanged, so you just got a stripper sugar mama and just kind of punted the whole career thing.
I thought I was winning. You know what I mean? I thought my perspective was like I get to watch, Judge Judy and Judge Joe Brown all day. It's great. Life's good. I'm laying on the couch, eating chips, drinking Arizona green teas and stuff. Life's good.
Selling steroids out of her apartment.
Yep, selling steroids. At the time too, I had this guy. He was buying OxyContin powder, like pure OxyContin powder, like kilos of this stuff. And so he was pressing. And so I was selling those for him too. So I tell you, like anybody that's on here that is listening or whatever that did ecstasy, like back in the day, we'd press tabs. It's like they would press, ecstasy is like a combination of a bunch of different drugs, like pressed into this tablet. Well, so my buddy bought a press and bought all this OxyContin powder and was making his own like OxyContins. And so I was selling those for like super cheap. He was selling them to me for super cheap, and I was flipping them for super like. I mean, it was an amazing deal. They were great. I mean, it was like the most amazing thing to hit the market. And it was a genius idea on his part. He's also like a genius. He's still around. I still talk to him every so often. He's cleaned up. He's been in recovery for a couple of years, so we kind of keep in touch. Lives over in Baton Rouge, but he was another one of those guys that was kind of genius on how to like sell drugs through the mail. And he would like ride his dirt bike and had like a fake, ID and had post office boxes, and he would ride his dirt bike up there and like get the shit, and in case like the police or whatever were there, he'd like speed off on his dirt bike. If they had cease and desist orders in there, sometimes it's a lot stricter now. I mean, you can't get away with stuff like you could back in those days, because now they'll just arrest you. But they used to have like they would send, and they would tell you your stuff was seized, and they would send a cease and desist order and put it in your post office box. Basically, like stop what you're doing.
So when you say cease and desist, it's like they confiscated the drugs that were shipped to you, and they know that you're basically buying drugs.
Yes.
And they basically just put a letter in there that says stop.
Pretty much. Like, look, stop what you're doing. Okay, we don't want to chase you, but he would show up on his little dirt bike and he had a fake ID. And I mean, it's like genius. I mean, I don't even know how these people learn how to do this stuff. I was never that like kind of suave at selling drugs. I mean, I had my own little systems. I hit doctors, and I would go with friends to hit doctors, and I would make, actually made pretty good money. I still couldn't support my habit that well, but I mean, I had maybe $100-$200 habit a day. So
$200 a day.
Easy, yeah.
No
Yeah,
kidding.
gram of heroin was like about $100. Roxy's at that time, I could get them super cheap. That was like my big thing. And my buddy that I used to go to the doctor with, he actually just died. It's kind of sad story, but he's my age. We hit the doctors together, and I actually heard about him maybe like 8 months ago from a mutual friend, and said he ran into his sister, and his sister told my buddy that he was in the hospital and he was dying of liver failure. And maybe like 2 months ago, about 2 months ago, he died. He like went into a coma. It's like, man. But yeah, his name was Matt.
Now, didn't you say he was in? I remember you mentioned, wasn't he in recovery at one point?
No, I brought him to a meeting. I think if I told you, I brought him to a meeting. He's the one who I brought him to a meeting, right? So the day I went to treatment, I was supposed to go to the doctor, And I called him
Not to
up and
get
said,
better, to buy more drugs, right? To
yeah,
get more,
like,
to
I
get
got to go
another
to the
script.
doctor. Yeah. Like, so when I say doctor, I'm talking about pill mills.
Yeah.
Basically you show up, you sit there for like 3 hours, 4 hours, sometimes all day, basically, but then you're leaving with a script that's, at one point we got I think it was 240 30s in one visit, which is a lot of 30s, 30 milligram Oxycontins, Roxys. And, you get like, 100 Xanaxes and like maybe 100 Somas or something. So it was like a pretty big hit for $600. So I'd put up the $600, and I had a couple people I did this with. So I'd go to the doctor, I'd put up the money. My boys would get the drugs, and we'd go cash and fill them. And then, he'd give me these pills for like $10 a pop, and I could turn around and sell them for like 25 or 30. So I had a good little system going, bring these people to the doctor, put up the $600 and fill it. And then, I could sell these drugs. I'd sell all those, and I'd buy heroin basically with all the money I made.
Hmm. And so
So
you were
that went
telling the
on.
story. So the day you were supposed to go to the doctor with him.
Yeah. The day I was supposed to get a doctor with him, I called him and I said, bro, I'm going to treatment, and he was like, good for you, bro. Good. He's like, well, what's up with the money? Like I said, all right, bro. So I'm going to leave you. I left him at my buddy, a mutual friend of ours' house. I left him $600, fake piss, like a thing of fake piss, so he could do the drug test. Because that's another thing about those doctors' visit. They don't care if you have the drug in your system or not. They just want to make sure you don't have any other illegal substances in your drugs, like in your drug screen. So he used fake piss every time, and they didn't care. So I gave him $600 in fake piss, and he went to the doctor, and I went to treatment. The craziest part of that story is I go to treatment that night. He gets to the doctor, fills all his stuff, sells a bunch of pills, buys a bunch of meth, and goes to jail that night. And ended up in the penitentiary he was wanted in Pennsylvania. So he got shipped back upstate to Pennsylvania for like a year and a half. He gets out of prison, hits me up on Facebook, and he's like, hey, man, I'm going to be in Slidell. Like, what's up, man? And what's going on? You want to hit the doctor? And I'm like, dude, I'm in recovery now. Like, I'm not doing that, and he's like, well, it'd be good to see you still. And for people in recovery, it's not a great idea to be around people who are still using.
I
I'm just going
bet
to put that
not.
out. But I was like, I'm going to go pick this dude up and bring him to a meet. So I pick him up. He's drunk as hell. I bring him to a meeting. He comes into the meeting. He's listening. He's paying attention. I mean, he's like fresh out the penitentiary too. And this dude was in and out of the penitentiary all his life. He almost started a fight with one dude in the meeting. This guy's like sitting next to him eating, and he's like, "Mate, you making a lot of noise, bro. I'm like, calm down, man. Like, you can't be fighting people." So he's paying attention to everybody sharing though, and he's like really into it. And this one girl shared, her name's Stephanie, a good friend of mine. And so she's sharing. After she gets done sharing, he stands up, he's clapping, he's like, some good ass shit. That's some good ass shit. I'm like, dude, calm down, man. But after the meeting, we had a real conversation. I said, so what'd you think? And he said, dude, he looked straight at me and says, you know it, I know it. I'm an addict, but I don't want to stop. I said, that's fine. I respect that. We didn't talk again until about 4 months ago for the first time. That's the first time I talked to him and the last time I talked to him. It's crazy that he died, but it was to be expected, He still didn't want to stop. Because the last time I talked to him,
Chose that path and
that's it.
stayed on
There's
stayed
nothing
on
you
it.
can do. There's nothing you could do unless they want to change, And that led me, all that darkness led me to the next kind of phase of my life,
And I want to spend more time on that next phase of your life. But the question I have too, though, is when you're in, like you said, all this darkness, right? All this violence, all this drugs, everything
there's a
you
lot
can
of fighting
imagine,
in there
all the
too.
debauchery you can imagine. What's that?
I said there was a lot of fighting in there too. I fought a lot.
Yeah, fighting and violence and whatever. What do you think was the thing that caused you to want to go to rehab? Or was it one thing, or was it an all the time thought, or did you periodically consider getting clean? Or talk to me about, like, what did that feel like? I mean, first of all, how long were you using drugs? I mean, 10 years, 15 years? How long was that?
I probably started when I was maybe 12 or 13, but then went on, I would say, like using a lot at 15. And then from
Really?
15.
As young as 15?
Oh yeah, I mean, I was already using before 15. I had like done pain pills and smoked weed pretty. Oh, I would say regularly. I was smoking weed at with Zach, Mike, and like Mike Shepard. Rest in peace too. But I
Mm.
mean, all of them. I was we were taking pills, smoking weed, but then I broke my arm, and then like I had this easy access to taking pills every day, and then I left Pope, and I mean, it just was on after that. I mean, I never stopped. So I mean, from 15 to 29. I never stopped. There was probably not really even a day unless I just couldn't get something and I was like dope sick for a couple of days. But that was pretty much just straight using. And it's dark. I mean, it's not glamorous. I mean, it's fun for a while, but then it's a lot of alone time. It's a lot of just hating yourself. I mean, there's plenty of times like while I'm just doing drugs, looking in the mirror, crying, like you want to stop, but I mean, you truly, there is something really dark and sinister about addiction, and I think it's a very misunderstood thing. Um, I work with schizophrenics now. I work in a clinic at Tulane with schizophrenics, and it's kind of uncanny to see the similarities of like how these sicknesses are like kind of similar in a lot of ways. I mean, just like the power of delusion,
Yeah.
and that's like specific. Like, I mean, I don't hear voices and stuff like that. But there's like I was very delusional. I was a very sick person for a very long time, and what brought me, that was your question. What brought me to it to want to change? I don't know if it's like one thing specifically. It's truly a culmination of just life, bad decisions, life beating the shit out of me. I said that to you the other day. Like, Stallone said that in his movie, life's undefeated. Like, life will literally beat the shit out of you until you learn.
Mhm.
That's what I've come to understand about life. There's a path that I should be on, and when I'm not on it, it sucks. Life sucks. But then if I'm kind of more aligned with this path, there's a flow there, and life becomes enjoyable and
Mhm.
kind of in flow and much more easy. And like there's an understanding there with it. It's like a relationship with life. But I
Right.
never understood that. I wanted to be a rebel. I thought that using drugs was like, for all intents and purposes, like cool. I thought like that was cool people. I don't know why I thought that was cool. Maybe just because Slidell kind of thought drugs and fighting was cool. I mean, that's what we kind of grew up in. Like, it wasn't like make really good grades and, move somewhere and be a doctor or something. It was kind of like use drugs and fight and go to Old Town.
Yeah. I can relate to a lot of the violence. I can
Yeah.
also relate to kind of being in and around some of those drug circles to an extent. And admittedly, I can't really give you a great reason on why I was able to not use in any way. Because I know, and I've only really learned now through conversations with you that everyone in my neighborhood, from a very early age, like almost even like junior high and younger, was like loaded all the time, like using,
Yeah.
using drugs and kind of developed into full blown drug addicts in high school and adulthood. And I don't know, I don't have a great reason why I was able to stay unscathed or whatever.
You
But
had other purposes, man. I feel like you were, I don't know what it was, but I remember trying to pollute you a couple times and you were
do
always
you
kind of,
really? Do you
oh
really?
yeah.
I don't, because I don't
I
remember that.
remember definitely I was trying to get you to smoke weed at my parents' house one time, I think. And then,
Really?
yeah, that's the only time I really ever remember trying to get you to do something. I don't remember
See, I would
even,
have a couple of different circles, right? Because I hung out with everybody, right?
yeah,
And so when I'd be in a certain group and they everyone kind of had their own drugs of choice, right? And certain people would just tug on you from this angle, another one tug on you from this angle, and different thing. Man, I don't even know how to explain what it was like navigating all that, but just not. I don't know. I would even point back to maybe even my early childhood, single digit years, right? Like elementary, being exposed to some of the things that I was exposed to in my upbringing around my dad being in a band and having all these, basically groupies hanging around the house, like during weeknights, jam sessions in the front living room and stuff, seeing what that lifestyle was like and what it looked like up close and personal with people who were drinking and doing drugs all the time, like on a daily basis. And I think it forged such a negative image in my mind that I never wanted that to be my reality. Like I just never wanted to participate in that. And I can't say exactly why that was my reaction to it or my response to it, but I'm glad that it was.
Yeah, it was one of the things that I think probably separated us for a while as friends, because our paths didn't align. My path was like destruction and drug use. I remember thinking that, I always respected you, I've always respected you as a person and loved you. But I remember thinking like, I'm too corrupt for this dude.
Nah, man.
I'm like too corrupt for this dude.
No chance.
But you always were there. I'm telling you, bro, you always were, you loved me despite all my insanity. And I know we've had conversations in like your wedding, and we've talked about that stuff. And just through the years, I mean, you've always kind of.
Well, hey, man. I mean, you meant enough to me. You meant enough to me to have you in my wedding. So that should show whatever path you were on or whatever was going on. My love for you was still just as strong too, man.
Yeah, and I think that's what helps. I think people like me really transition into like recovery a little bit more. I mean, to know that there's people there, not enabling the behavior, but that there's people that have been there. And you set boundaries with me, which was good. You know what I mean? I respected you even more for that. And I feel blessed, all those years ago when I got in recovery that we started that kind of reconnection. And it's, look, I'm not a person I've always struggled with intimacy. You know what I mean? I've always struggled. I think one of the deepest, darkest things of addiction is self-destructive relationship patterns. We destruct relationships. It's kind of, unfortunately, it's a part of my nature. I have a hard time allowing people in. Not as hard. I mean, I've grown a lot in my recovery, but it's like, it's more of kind of an antisocial, just demeanor, like I'm struggle sometimes socially. I'm kind of socially awkward, really socially awkward at times in
I
my
think
head.
that's just that. No, I think you're just being self-conscious. That you're not. That's not the view from the outside. I can promise you.
Well, inside, I'm like, that's how it feels. I can play it cool, and that's been my experience with a lot of addicts. I'd love to share a little bit if we got time, just like that kind of moving into
Dude, we've got
recovery.
all the time. Yeah, we've got all the time you need. And that's one of the things that I did want to touch on is from a habit forming standpoint and from a, poor habit. Obviously, you had many, many years of having well entrenched bad habits, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, drug use being one of them. I'm sure there's other ancillary ones, but talk to us about maybe some of that, and then also what lessons you might have extracted from some of that darkness, and then what was the transition like into recovery?
Yeah, talk about bad habits. I mean, good God. I mean, from everything from hygiene, like there's a saying that addiction reduces you to like an animalistic level, and it's very true. I mean, that's why most people lose their teeth. It's like you don't brush your teeth, you don't shower, you don't self-care, you don't diet. I mean, I often joke with buddies of mine about our diets, like a good day for me was like eating a bear claw from a gas station, or like a dollar cheeseburger from McDonald's. That was basically my diet because when you're using a lot of heavy opiates, you got to put something in your stomach. You can't just like not eat, you'll throw up. So, I mean, typically you need something in there usually to like at least, mellow the blow of drugs.
But you wouldn't need to eat like a full meal. Like you wouldn't really need
No,
to eat otherwise, though.
really. No, not
No.
really. I mean, dude, I promise you, for a while, I lived on like basically snowballs, watermelon snowballs with condensed milk. That was my thing. I'd scrape together change, and I'd go down to God, what's the name of that snowball stand? Southern Delights on Gauze. I would get a watermelon snowball with condensed milk on it. That was like basically what I would eat for the day. It's a lot of
No
calories.
kidding.
So yeah, so going from kind of that level, no job. I hadn't worked in, 4 years basically. I was selling drugs. I had no routine, and I was 29 years old, coming in. I got clean in January. So my birthday was in April. Once I turned 30, a couple months after I got clean. So it's basically you're like 30 years old and you've got no habits at all. So I mean, that's the biggest thing they try to teach you. Like when you go to a treatment center of some sort, they're gonna try to like routine, like go to bed at this time, brush your teeth, shower. Like they start to try to build in these habits. And that's, I wanted to be like I want it to be clean. And I should say this because a lot of people kind of misunderstand what it means to be clean. So I have not had alcohol or any drugs, period, in 9 years, like zero. So a lot of times people were kind of like, well, do you still drink? No, like I literally have not had one sip of alcohol. No, zero. So like living that kind of lifestyle for 9 years. But when I got, so let me back up. So when I got into this treatment center, I'm like, well, I'm still going to drink, like nobody doesn't not drink. Like I live in Louisiana, everybody drinks. Like there's Mardi Gras and there's games and there's crawfish and there, you drink beer and, or you drink, and the biggest fear was, how am I going to interact with people socially?
Mm,
How am I even going to, my whole life was centered around using drugs basically to cope being around people.
sure.
So that was a huge fear, so I get into this rehab. I immediately like,
You see those goofy advertisements for alcohol, right? It's beer. It's been helping white people
yeah,
dance since however
yeah,
long ago, right?
yeah, of course. I mean, and there's a reason. I mean, it helps break, it kind of numbs out consciousness, it's a kind of a beautiful thing in some points of perspective, to have like a little bit less awareness or consciousness, so habits wise. So I started to take things kind of serious around like maybe week 3. There was a guy in there, this dude Steven, and he had been there the whole time. He'd been there for like maybe a couple months before me. He gets out and he's like saying all the right stuff, you know, gets out of there. He's back in a week with like needle marks all over him, track marks. I'm like, bro, like it's like that out there? Like, really? And I started getting kind of scared, because at one point, like I was so sure I'm never gonna, like, I'm not gonna screw up. I'm not gonna screw this up. And then when I
Right.
watched him do that, it shook me to a place where I went and asked this tech who I'd kind of gotten close to. I was like, dude, his name's Randy. I said, Randy, like, what's the odds of us like making it? And he looks at me and he goes, I'll be surprised if one of you motherfuckers make it. There was like 21 of us in there. And he said, you better be that one. And he was right. I was the only person out of that treatment center that stayed clean. And so let me tell you about this. Okay. So like, this is a, like how when you're getting clean, you have like zero relationship skills. So like I wanted to talk to this tech. Like he had shared some stuff that was like very deep, and I had never really heard another man kind of talk openly and honestly and intimately about life and feelings. And that was like something foreign to me. So when I heard him talking like that, it kind of captured me. And I was like, damn, I need to get to know this guy. But I had no relationship skills whatsoever. I didn't know you could just walk up and just start a conversation. So I'm like up there like plotting and scheming, like, how the hell do you start a conversation with somebody? Like, what do you do? So I'm like reading in this book, and I'm like, oh, this looks like an important thing to say, So I walked over to him. I was like, hey, what does this mean in this book? Like that's basically how I started that relationship with him. And I still talk to him to this day. He's a good guy, man. He's been, in recovery for like 20 something years.
He still works in the center.
No, I mean they have since shut that place down, but it was called Keystone when I got there, but I think somebody had just died in there from like an overdose of duster. Like I got there and somebody had literally just died, like maybe a month before that, in the place.
What's duster?
It's like the stuff you blow off your keyboard with. So
What?
people use that. Yeah, and it like gives you a pretty good buzz. But the problem is if you keep inhaling it, you're gonna die. Like so you basically run out of oxygen and basically overdose from it. But Yeah, so that kind of woke me up. That whole kind of scenario. I was getting out and like maybe I was there for 35 days. So I was coming up on the end and I was starting to, it takes a long time to really start to wake up. Like I said, it's very delusional. Like addiction is such a very delusional. Like the majority of my life, I thought, I wasn't hurting anybody but myself. I didn't have an impact on other people by my using, from all my car accidents and overdoses. And I one time woke up in Tulane Hospital, overdosed, and my dad was there, and they rolled me into this room like on a gurney, and my dad, he's all upset. He's like looking at me. He's like, "Dude, I thought we were gonna lose you." And I was like, I almost like laughed it off and was like, "Man, I do this all the time. Like it's not a big deal." And like I always remember that moment. Like looking back now, just because of how like sick you have to be, you have to be really.
To just brush off almost dying.
Yeah, just like no big deal. Like, bro, I do this all the time. And I did. That's the reality was I overdosed all the time. It wasn't like I just happened to be around some friends that it freaked out and they brought me to the ER. So I started to kind of like in that treatment center start to wake up to the reality of what I was actually facing. Like, okay, like I'm really sick. I haven't worked in 4 years. Like, how the hell am I going to build a life? I have no social skills, I have no coping skills. And I was scared, you know what I mean? And I started kind of getting plugged in with the counselors there, and they connected me. Randy actually connected me with some people in Slidell. He was like, dude, you gotta get plugged in, and that started my journey. I left. I was in Scott, Louisiana, so it's like right outside Lafayette. I left Scott that day, and my whole recovery is kind of based in 12-step. I know we've talked about it in length, but
Yeah, no, share.
for people that are listening, like 12-step, there's kind of like based AA, NA, there's CA, there's like hundreds of 12-step fellowships based around the 12 steps, the 12 traditions, and the 12 concepts. So basically, all it is about trying to learn to live principally. That's in a nutshell what the 12 steps do. They try to teach principles, through these steps. And each step is kind of like encased with principles. So that's what they tell you, like when you leave treatment, go to meetings, go to like these recovery meetings. And it's nothing like TV. Like that's one of the greatest failures I think of our time is like doctors and therapists have no idea what happens in actual recovery. They have zero idea. It's like the craziest thing. I work with doctors and therapists and they have no idea. Like they don't even know what happens in recovery. And they're trying to teach people about recovery. It's like so backwards. And, I was watching a TV show the other day and I'm like, that is not how like sponsorship, like they show sponsors like chasing their sponsees down, like showing them at their house. And like, it's not like that at all. Meetings are literally like almost like you and I's conversations, like people share openly and honestly. And then people don't even really like, it's kind of like basically what happens in a meeting is somebody will share something that's going on and then you just say thanks for sharing. There's no cross talking, there's no hey you should do this, none of that. It's literally just you're sharing something, I acknowledge that you're sharing it, thanks for sharing, and you move on. And it teaches to like listen, acknowledge that we listened. It's like there's so many things that go on in there that are just like super healing for people that are broken.
Sounds like a bunch of non-addicts would benefit from it, huh?
Oh my gosh. Listening, empathy, like the simplest of things that start to happen. So you get there, I was terrified. Like I said, I'm 30 years old. Like they do these readings in the beginning of the meeting. I was petrified to read one. I was so scared to even pick up a reading. I was like, and even when I did, it was suggested. Randy's like, when you get there, get a reading, shut the fuck up and read it. Like don't allow your mind to talk you out of it. Just go get a reading, sit down, shut up. And when they ask you to read the reading, read it. Say, I'm Karl, I'm an addict, and read this reading. And that's how it starts, and I messed it all up. I was, sputtered and stumbled all over the words. And, this guy came up afterwards and he says, I was like, man, I messed that reading all up. He's like, it's good. It's a good thing you did. And I said, what? Why? He said, because it makes everybody else comfortable with doing it too. And I was like, that's some pretty deep. That was a pretty deep thing he said. It's always stuck with me, like by my mistakes, it allows other people to make mistakes, and feel safe doing it. It's the world. We act like it's, I was raised to be, perfect, or the idea that I have to be perfect. Like I can never make a mistake. And the reality is like the mistakes literally help me grow. Like by fucking up, by allowing myself to screw up, I grow, I
Right.
develop as a human being. I never gave myself that luxury. I feel like,
That's one of the principles that I feel like this platform is going to provide to the listeners. I want for guests to be able to feel comfortable with sharing some of their deep, dark secrets that they may be sharing for the first time, or they may have, recall a certain thing in the moment that allows them to be a little bit vulnerable, but it might inspire someone else. It might inspire a listener to be more comfortable with their story, because whatever quote unquote thing they did isn't as bad as what they just heard that person share. Or they realize that they aren't the only person that feels the way that they do. They aren't the only person that's experiencing difficulties in their relationships. They're not the only person that's experiencing difficulties mentally and emotionally and, psychologically. They're not the only person that's challenged. And seeing someone else go before you in that vulnerability is powerful. And that's what I hope that this platform will provide.
yeah, it will, and it is very true. I mean, because that's what's gained to those moments, like knowing you're not alone, knowing you're not like the only crazy person on the planet. We're all nuts. Look, I've worked in mental health a long time. Everybody's fucking crazy. Okay, everybody's nuts, including myself.
It's like,
So I think there's
do you look at yourself long enough? Do you observe yourself and examine yourself long enough to recognize the crazy, and then do what you can to accept the fact that at some level, right? At some level, there are components of your being, there are components of how you interact with things that's a little bit unmanageable, and you have to kind of regulate it, right? You have to put
Mhm.
certain tools and certain structures and certain systems in place, and you have to get accountability partners, and you have to, be vulnerable with other people and create community to keep you on the right path. That's to me, that's it's just healthy.
Yeah, coping skills. I never learned those until now. It's like all
So
those
would you
times.
So would you say that life kind of started over for you again at 30? Like you experienced life again, or
Yeah,
really probably for the first time clearly?
yeah. It was truly like a rebirth. I mean, it really was. I was watching this great documentary the other day. It was called Full Circle. I want to throw it out there, but it's about a guy who gets paralyzed, basically at like 20 something, and then but he's like, I have my life before I got paralyzed, and then my life after I got paralyzed. It's a great
Hmm.
documentary too. It's very powerful in so many ways. But yeah, it was like I had never lived before. Honestly, it
You
was such a
definitely didn't experience anything. How would I put it? You didn't experience anything like not inebriated, right? Like not
yeah,
every experience you had was under the influence of some type of like altering drug. Is that pretty
yeah,
fair?
yeah. I mean, prior to like, I was a child and then completely got lost, but all the developmental stages of life were blurred. All the most like important, like dating, you know, identity, kind of development of purpose and meaning, and all these things that you start to kind of develop, in those adolescent years, 13 through like 21. Didn't do that, so I had to do it at 30. And I think that that's also something that a lot of people kind of don't understand. Like the challenge is why most people can't stay clean. It's because it's such an undertaking of like complete transformation. I mean, it's like you've lived your whole life without learning anything that all the things you should have learned when you were like a teenager.
Sure.
How to work, how to, have healthy relationships, and how to build a life that's worth like living. And I think like those are like the early, of course I was so excited to be clean. I was so excited to be alive. There was people dying all around me. All the people, I was using with were dying. And so I started taking that journey, and I started I did a ton of writing. So like the steps that are worked in recovery, because they are worked, like the first step in NA, like that's Narcotics Anonymous, it is it's 69 questions long. So it's you go through, you write these questions out, you have answers to them, and it talks about denial, and it talks about all these different things. It's trying to break like the delusion, basically. So the
Yes.
first talks about powerlessness and unmanageability. So it talks a lot about denial and unmanageability. It talks to ask you all the questions about your life. Have you ever been arrested? Have you ever it asks you so many questions about unmanageability. It all comes out. It all starts to come out, and it's smacking you in the face. Like stealing jewelry from my grandmother and pawning. It's like all the things that I did that I never thought I would do, swore that I would never do, the 10-year-old me would have never dreamed of doing. I just got kind of lost along the way.
Right.
So that kind of first step, like they talk about, starts to wake you up, and then the second step we come to, believe that a power greater than ourselves can restore us to sanity. And it's truly like coming back to sanity. I mean, people coming off drugs are crazy as shit. They can kind of like try to pretend not to be, but I know like from personal experience, I'm around them all the time. And I was one, still am one most of the time.
I
But
don't think I don't think you can still put yourself in a category of coming off. You've been
no,
off for 9 years now.
I sometimes bounce in between insanity and sanity. But that's a big thing. Like that second part is like we start to wake up, and I think that's the biggest thing. And you and I talk about it the most, which is like this coming into consciousness, like the waking up from, damn, I've been killing myself. Like it never really dawned on me. I was so caught up in trying to like just feel good and live my life and like, fuck society, like leave me alone, that I had completely forgotten like that there was so much beauty in the world. As I start to wake up to this stuff, everything, and there's like some stuff in books I've read, it's like seeing color for the first time. And it truly feels like that. You're just like waking up to, wow, like there's birds and there's breezes and there's like, people laughing, and I can laugh again, and
Sure.
I can feel feelings again. And, you start to like make friends and again, and you're like, like starting to build somewhat of a community. And that's a big thing. Like what recovery does is like, it builds out an atmosphere. Like, you're talking about your platform, it creates a safe atmosphere that allows people to kind of share who they are, and like we were talking about it. So it's principles, right? So the third step is like mainly about principles, so I had been
Principles that
brought,
you establish for yourself or principles that they tell you?
it's kind of like built in. There's principles in each step. So like the first step is honesty, open-mindedness, willingness, humility, and acceptance. So like the big piece, honest, okay, hey, like I got a real problem here. Open-minded, hey, I need some help. I think maybe y'all can help me. Willing, okay, I'm gonna show up to a meeting. Yeah, you need me to help sweep? I'm gonna sweep. Okay, hey, you want me to read this? Yeah, I'll read it. Humility, which is like perfect example. So I hadn't worked in 4 years. I'm in rehab pretending like I had a good job still. I wanted everybody in there to know, like, and luckily I had just had Christmas. So like my brother and my family had like, bought me some new jeans and shoes and shit. So I went in there like kind of freshly dressed, but I'm like in there pretending
That you had
like
your shit together.
yeah, like I
Yeah,
had my
you
shit
had
together.
stuff together.
No humility. No, like to me, humility is just, it's not more or less. It's just like exactly who I am. It's to thine own self be true, like in this present moment. Who am I currently? And then the acceptance piece, which is like to me, I always know when I'm in acceptance because I'm actually doing the things I need to change. Like if I know I have a problem, like, oh, I
Right.
need to quit, like drugs. Okay, you need, oh, well, have you accepted that? Because if you have acceptance, you're going to rehab, or you're going to see a doctor, or you're taking action steps. That's when you're in acceptance. If you're not in acceptance, if you're not taking action steps, you're in denial.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the big piece. Like, so those are the principles of the first step. So like they do give us the principles, but there's principles in the steps, there's principles in the traditions, and then there's principles in the concepts. So the steps are for the individual. The traditions are for the groups. Like, how do I manage to be around people? How do I manage to be at work? How do I work with other people? And the concepts are for like, how do I be of service? So like there's principles. Yeah. There's like, they give principles.
I feel like everyone on earth should spend time with the first principle, with the first step, right? Like,
Oh yeah.
even
Powerless.
just the honesty piece, right? To
Yeah.
share a little bit about my deal, right? I don't feel like I grew up in an environment where being honest and transparent was celebrated. You know what I mean?
No.
Where it was
Tell me the truth and I'm going to beat your ass, basically.
the way. I don't feel like it was, I don't feel like being honest and forthright was put on display for me. And as a result, I was a liar most of my life, and still now today, there's still a lot of tendencies around, oh, well, that's not a big deal if you don't really, share openly about that, or it's not a big deal if you don't come clean about this or that or the other thing. And it's like, no, any bit of hiding, any bit of, pushing aside, any bit of pressing it down, any bit of fabrication is unhealthy.
Yeah, it's not celebrated like it should be.
Mm-mm.
And people, I tell you, like I've had the blessing in my life to watch people really grow and change and evolve, as I'm sure you have as well. I mean, it's just when people really can get honest and they have that place to get honest about what's really going on, changes everything. Like without judgment, without anything. And that's that part of sharing. Thanks for sharing. People will tell me the deepest, darkest secret, bro, like in sponsorship, and it's just like, and most of the time I can tell them I've been there, I've been through it too. There's a lot of things.
Right. Most of the time it's like, yep, done that one or did that. Yeah, been there.
I've done that, been through it. And that's a big piece of that kind of step working process. It's, and I don't know, do you want me to kind of like go through the steps? I mean,
it's up to you. What I think would be helpful is, what lessons, right? So if there's lessons that you can extract out of, which I'm guessing every step, there's a lesson to be learned.
Yeah. Well, maybe I'll kind of share like my journey and we'll talk a little bit about,
Sure.
Like what it was like not having worked for 4 years, so I was petrified. I was like cutting grass first with this guy I met in recovery. That was like my first little gig. I was doing that a couple days a week. And then I was a delivery guy for this respiratory business out of Covington. So I like go around and deliver like hospice and respiratory stuff. It was kind of a cool job early on. I'd go in there and I'd deliver these hospice beds and stuff. And like people would be, literally I'd bring a bed and the next day I'd come pick it back up because they passed away. And it's just like, it's like the constant daily reminder that like impermanence, like it gave me such an appreciation for life early on, getting moments with people. Like I sat and talked with people and then like 2 or 3 days later I'd go back and they'd be dead. And that was like really driving me in those moments, and like the third step's about making a decision, right? And I got confused really at that time. I was like, had a lot of stuff against, the concepts of God. I was raised very religious and Baptist. And it kind of drove me into like really wanting to explore authenticity. That's another principle, so I encourage everyone really to, if they haven't explored authenticity with those beliefs or like with yourself, like I always encourage people to really, like, there's so much out there, and I like started reading all these books about the histories of religion, like exploring like what that word meant to me,
Right.
and it gave me a lot of sense of peace, to finally, after years of being angry, and I read a bunch of like angry atheist books, and there's like these 4 guys that write nothing but like angry atheist stuff, basically destroying all religion. Like that's literally what they set out to do. Like you know, Christopher Dawkins, Hitchens, Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, like all these guys. One's a scientist, one was like a guy over in England, I think. And there's just like a couple guys that like literally set out. So I was like super, super angry for a while. And after, like kind of like that principle of letting go, finally I just like started to let go and just realize like I don't even really care. Like I could see that something was kind of working in my life and like propelling me on in this journey, you know, and working early on with like a lot of death. Like I had seen a lot of death in my life, like friends died, family members died, but then like diving deeper, I mean, I used to do like a lot of like meditation. So that was something new to me in recovery too, was like meditating. And like I did a lot of like death meditation. And
What do you mean by that? Expand on that. What's a death meditation?
so it's like you basically, so like yoga, right? So yoga is the life cycle. It's basically you start in child's pose. You start off kind of slow, you're warming up, then you get into a more active, like moving, like you get like almost build a sweat. This is a typical like yoga class. And then you start to wind down, you slow down, you're like getting more deep stretch, you're like releasing hips. And then you go to Shavasana, which is corpse pose. So it's kind of like the whole life cycle, right? So death meditation is basically I'm going to lay down and I'm going to basically like focus on death. Like there's like other types of meditation where you focus on sending like goodness, like where you're focusing on, you have maybe people that you really, really love, like loving kindness meditation. Like you send love to this person that it's easy to send love to. Like I'm thinking of like my mom, it's easy to send love to my mom. And then I'm sending to someone I'm not so content with, and then all of a sudden I'm sending love to a person I can't stand. It's like the practice of sending love. So like the death meditation is in a similar fashion where I'm like thinking of like death, thinking about death after, which is I don't typically
Death for who? Like killing other people or you yourself
no, just,
dying?
just like death. Like what will it be like? There was like a kind of like a spiritual guy, Alan Watts, that he said people focus on the wrong thing. They focus on what it's going to be like afterwards when they should be thinking about what it was like before.
That's good.
What was it like before you came into existence? Like you're so worried about what's after. What happened for the eternity before you were even here? The ego is so like it gets caught up with that. We get caught up with after instead of thinking before. It's such a continuation. Like life, death is such a continuation. I don't know. I found a lot of peace. I did a lot of like, I went to Buddhist temples and I meditated in Buddhist temples. I found a lot of peace with just, I don't really care. I don't really give a damn what it, like, I've kind of formed a relationship with something, with some kind of power that works. But maybe so just like fast forward and, like, I don't want to bore people with the steps because it can get like, I know we've been on here for a while already. So, but I can tell you this. So like going through the steps and starting to kind of gain consciousness and like reawaken and go through like all the process of like making amends. And if anybody's in recovery, like I do feel it's important to say this much is when you get into recovery, do not make amends. There's a process for that, and in steps 8 and 9, 8, you make a list, and 9, you actually make an amends, meaning like, I'm not saying I'm sorry. Like, it's not like you go out and tell people you're sorry. That's a very huge misconception. The amends is like an amendment in the Constitution. It changes it, meaning like, if I wronged you in the past, I work on myself to a place where I don't do that to you anymore. That's a true amends. So like, yes, there's a part of a vocal, like, hey, I wronged you, and I should not have done that, but that's only after a period of process to where I've accomplished the change.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a very misunderstood thing that amends is like, I get into recovery and I go out and I say, I'm sorry to you, but it's very, very different than
There's a lot
that.
of internal work that needs to happen before you're even able
Huge,
to do it effectively, right?
yeah, huge amounts of work, and that was like a big, like, And I tell you, after, a year, 2 years or whatever, I mean, when would run into people and actually make an amends, most of the time they'd say, dude, I mean, I wouldn't even say I'm sorry. I would never even use that word. I would just say, look, I wronged you for this reason or whatever. And they would like, dude, I know you're sorry, man. Like, you're different. I see that you're different. You're a different person. And that's the big piece. That's actually the amends. They have a thing called living amends, and that's like, I can never fully right the wrongs that I've committed to my parents and my family, the people closest to me. There's just no way. Like, the trauma that I put them through, it's almost like it's not irreversible, but we've had to grow, and it's taken 7, 8, 9 years to fully, like, I feel like, heal those relationships with my parents. And it took a lot of effort. Like, I'll share this about my dad and I's relationship. We were always kind of like hostile. My dad's not an emotional guy. He's very typical, like, alpha male, doesn't ever speak about emotions, like, hesitant to say I love you, pretty much, period. But I took it upon myself early in recovery that I wanted to have a better relationship with him and be
Sure.
closer. We never hugged, we never said I love you. And I read this book early on. It was called Will the Real Me Please Stand Up? It's written by, like, this, I think he's like I can't remember exactly, but he was maybe a Jewish minister or something. I don't remember. Great book.
Say
Phenomenal.
it again. It's Would the Real Me Please Stand Up?
It's kind of hard to find. I think you can buy it on Amazon, like, paperback or something, but it's a great book. Phenomenal book about communication. Um, and so I took it, like, as a personal goal to start to not be afraid of rejection. So I'd go in for a hug with my dad. Like, every time I saw him, I try to give him a hug, and he'd basically, like, open side, like, yeah, bud, I'd be like, love you, dad. I'd try to give him a hug, and he'd hit me with the side hug with one arm, and he'd tap out. That's what we call it, tapping out, when they hug and you tap out. And he would never say I love you. And so this went on for years. But I through that process of, like, the amends in step 8, like, knew I had severely harmed him. Like, it's hard to love someone who's continuously trying to kill themselves. And I could never see that until I, like, did a lot of deep writing, reflecting, and understanding, like, from his perspective, what it must have been like to love someone like me. I totaled 3 cars, and I overdosed all the time. And I had my friend get shot. Like, I wasn't easy to love, and so I knew it had to be on me. It had to be on me to step up, to take the rejection, to continuously put myself out there. And now, I mean, we have an amazing relationship. Like, he'll walk in a room and hug me, and I can even get an I love you out of him most of the time. He still sometimes, like, buckles, I'll be like, love you, dad. Yeah, bud. Yeah, yeah. And hangs up the phone. But most of the time, like, there will be, like, a pause, and he'll be like, I love you too, and that's probably, those are some of the greatest gifts, and it took years to, like, heal those wounds, and so, like, going back to habits, because there is a step for that too. It's a 10 steps, like a daily inventory, and so I had to rebuild all those habits, and I had to rebuild all of my life, waking up at a certain time, and I became very disciplined. That's something that I really aspire to maintain. It's very important for me to maintain discipline, routine, structure. Like, I don't really, I don't go out. I never go out or anything. I don't, like, party anymore. I'm typically in bed by, like, 9:30. Like, a big night for me is, like, I might stay up to, like, 10:30 or 11. I wake up early, and this is not always, I'm not, like, so rigid that I can't live my life, but I do maintain a lot of discipline. I write regularly. I meditate regularly. I exercise almost every day. Things that really kind of help, like, there's a word, volatility, right? That's a big thing that I'm trying to manage emotionally, right? So by creating constant structure and routine helps manage the things that I can manage. Like, there's certain things that I can change, like that, have that serenity prayer, and there's certain things that I can change. I can change what I eat. I can change how much caffeine I drink. I can change there's a lot of things within my life that I can change through habits, and it's not easy. Look, I mean, we live in a world that is like super addictive. I mean, social media platforms, TV, food, caffeine, it's everywhere. I mean, it's like constantly being pushed in my face, and it's super addictive. I mean,
Mhm.
it's so addictive.
Intentionally addictive by the creators,
Yeah.
right? The people who organize this stuff. How do we get people hooked on this?
I mean, it's literally like the word everybody knows is algorithms. Like they're literally creating algorithms to make it more addictive. And so, I mean, and my mind is naturally, have a inclination to be impulsive and addictive. So there is like things I try to safeguard myself. It's been a struggle. I've been trying to let go a little bit more, being on my phone and spend a little bit more time like reading again and meditating again.
What are some effective safeguards that you found to be helpful?
Like for emotional stability, like balance.
Yeah.
I think probably the greatest benefits I've had are like exercise, of course. I mean, we talk about that all the time. Like you streak. I mean, you run every day. I mean, the more things that I can put in my day that are like safety features, it's like a kid running to their parent. It's a safety thing. Like I know that I can do this thing and feel safe. So like the more things that I can do in my life that have safety in them, like the better. So like some of the big things for me are like waking up in the morning at a good time. Like usually it's 5:30, and then meditation, writing, reflecting, like yoga, exercise, calling people. I make meetings. I do recovery stuff too, which is like good habits. But I mean, writing to me is one of the big ones that I always hated. As a child, I couldn't stand it. Like everybody told me about writing as a coping skill, and I was like, "That's the stupidest." Like it's crazy because I've got some journals from my like childhood, but I would only write when I like totaled a car. So it'd, like be no entries for a long time. It'd be like, "Today I crashed the car into the tree." Like, you know, I have cuts all over me. Like it's just like random journal entries. But what I figured out later, in recovery about writing was I use it as a way to create. Now that became much easier for me to do.
Yeah.
Like, so if I sit down and say, what do I want my career life to look like? If I sit down and do that in the morning, or if I sit down, okay, I want to work on becoming more emotionally balanced. What does that look like? What can I do? And then like just start creating. I want healthier relationships. Like I did it with God concepts and relationships. I had very unhealthy relationships. We didn't dive into all that, but I sat down one day and I started writing, what does a healthy relationship look like? And what do I want in my life?
Right.
And I wrote and I wrote and I wrote about those things and like started to like, I mean, people talk about manifestation all the time now. And that's to me, the power of putting the pen to paper, writing and beginning to see it in my mind and really like think about what I want it to look like in every detail, into the most minute detail, can be so powerful because it, like I describe it with these clients I work with, and I've heard it described this way, and that's where I got it. But it's like a ship going into the ocean without a map. Without a map, it's never going to reach its destination. And so basically, a vision is that. It's like I set a purpose and I set a meaning to my life, by saying, this is what I want, and then I sit down and I write and I create it. And that's been, but I was just talking with somebody about this the other day. I've reached a lot of those points. I've come further than I ever thought I would make it. Like there was a time in my life where I didn't think I could make one day without using drugs. That was like my goal. Okay. I'm going to make 24 hours without using drugs. I'm going to have $1 to put in the basket that's actually mine, you know, and so it's like these small goals. Like a guy once told me like this, he said, they tell you to make a list of things that you want in your life when you get into recovery.
Right.
He explained, he said, dude, you always sell yourself short because the things that you get are so far out of the realm of your comprehension at that time, you couldn't even write them. It's like hugging my dad, or it's like, having a good relationship with my mom. Like I never would have asked for those things because I didn't even know I could have them. I knew I wanted them, but it wasn't like I didn't think I could actually obtain that. But it was through those habits. I mean, I'm like a huge believer in habits, um, because I've had bad habits the majority of my life.
Sure.
And you got to put that energy somewhere. Like moving towards, because I know it's getting late, but uh, I guess like a big thing too, like a big thing about it is, and we talk about consciousness, like that's like coming towards the end of the steps. We can kind of like work towards a conclusion, but it's like the 11th step, about seeking through prayer and meditation. It's about consciousness, the whole thing, like I need to maintain consciousness. And that's why 10 comes before 11, because you need to have good habits
Yeah.
in order to maintain consciousness. And that's the biggest thing in my life is maintaining consciousness, because I can't technically like go to sleep. Like I can't afford to start to think that drugs are a solution for me. A guy I got clean with 9 years ago just died like 2 weeks ago. It's that serious, and people might not think it is that serious, but it's truly that serious. I mean, people are dying like every day. Like every single day I hear about people dying that I know. But the truth is, like, I'm never really worried about using through taking like a process by like working to become more aware and have like discipline and have these things in my life. There's not really like by creating, even though all the writing and the visioning and all that stuff, by creating a life that I really want to live. Like it's not like I'm never like white knuckling it, like as they call it. Like I'm never like, oh shit, I need a drink, or like I've literally never wanted to use. In all
Right.
my 9 years, like I've never like wanted to get high. There's been moments where I've been severely uncomfortable, and I wish I wasn't uncomfortable with feelings and stressed out about work or growth in career or making career changes. And that's a big piece of like the 12th step. People always had like having had a spiritual awakening. It's like there's truth to that. It's like about waking up, but it's also about trying to help others.
What's the 12th step?
Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we try to carry this message and to practice these principles in all our affairs. So it's kind of, wake up, you wake up as a result, and you try to help others wake up. And I think that's a principle that's in all life. You see it like big companies have mentors. It's the same kind of principles through all successful businesses. Successful companies do it all the time. You know what I mean? They train you, and then of course you train somebody else or whatever. You take somebody else through it, and it makes you a master, really. Because I mean, by teaching, like the student becomes the teacher, and that's a whole nother deal. Like I've sponsored a bunch of people, over the years. A couple of them have died, even over the couple of years. But that's been a lesson in itself.
That's one thing I think about a lot, because in today's world, a lot of folks that are online or kind of holding themselves up as coaches or mentors or people who can be helpful, all they've really done is either watch someone else do it, or they have, watched a video or seen a course or done super cursory level work, right? Like really shallow work or very minimal work. And they've been exposed to it once. And the next thing you know, they feel like they can teach it, right? Like they can show it to somebody else and they can teach it. But I've spent a decent amount of time with this concept of you can't offer to someone else something that you don't have. And especially when it comes to that concept that you just mentioned about consciousness and awareness, if I'm a completely unaware person that has no real depth of consciousness, and I haven't spent any time in meditation, I haven't spent any time in self discovery, I haven't done any time of working on myself in any of these ways, then how could I possibly be an effective coach or an effective mentor to someone else if I haven't walked the steps before them, right? And so I think about how necessary it is that, to use kind of some terminology that I'm familiar with, is like pick up your own cross, right? Like bear the weight of your own cross, fight your own fight, so that you can then make yourself available. Which self do you want to make available to other people? A healthy self, A peaceful, conscious, aware self. That's the person that I want to make available to others, right? I can only be effective to Karl or to anyone else in the way of peace of mind if I myself am dwelling in a state of peace of mind, right? And if I'm not, if I'm unsettled or unhinged or unmanageable, then how effective can I really be? And the truth is you can't. And
That
so
was the
that's
thing I wanted most, honestly.
what's that?
Peace. That was the thing I wanted most. Like the driving force. Like you asked me in the beginning, what was one of the biggest driving forces? One of them was I was tired of pretending to be okay because I wasn't okay. But the other one was I wanted to be at peace.
Sure.
But through those practices you talk about, I swear, like gaining peace of mind is one of the most valuable things I have. Like having peace within myself and being at peace. I mean, that's kind of why, like, I would never want to disturb it. Like people ask, like, well, why would you not drink, or why would you? I mean, why haven't you gone back? Why would I? I mean, I'm at peace finally, and I'm not knocking it. Other people can drink, like I can't personally because I've already been down that road. Like they told me,
Right.
your brain is broke now. It's done. You broke your brain. Like I'm lucky to even be walking. But yeah, peace of mind, man. I mean and it's obtainable. Like
It's
that's
so
the
funny
part that I
that you
love.
mentioned that. Can you see this?
No, what does it say? Peace of
So
mind.
peace of mind. I'm in the peace of mind business. That's right.
Peace
That's
of
what it
mind business.
says.
Yeah,
And 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 I wrote that a couple of days ago, and not even knowing that we would have this conversation. But that's what I spend time with. That's what I
yeah,
dwell on. That's what I contemplate. That's where my attention goes. And it really comes from hours and hours and hours of not only self reflection, but hours and hours and hours of time sitting one on one with another person, making myself available to them to let them share with me the struggles, the difficulties, the challenges, and the things that they wrestle with, oftentimes financially, and realizing that their issue is so much deeper than a jacked up checkbook, right? Their issue
mm,
is so much deeper, and it pervades the rest of their life. And as a result, that inauthenticity, the misalignment, the lack of depth, the lack of singularity, the lack of unity, the result is you can't manage money. The result is you don't have strong relationships. The result is you're
mm,
always lying all the time, right? Those are the effects of it. The cause is the imbalance in the you don't have peace, right? The cause
yeah.
is internally there's a there's something that's out of whack.
That's kind of like we were talking in the beginning about those choices. You know, we start to make choices that can either bring me into chaos or they can bring me into peace and flow. And it's true. Like we don't even know when we're doing it sometimes. It's so easy in today's world to make poor decisions in a second and then compound them, even in dishonesty. It's the same way. I'm dishonest a little bit and it just starts compounding more and more and more and more. And before you know it, it's a major deal. You know, and as a kid, I never understood that really. I never understood that by lying, I had internal like dissonance.
Yes.
I didn't understand like deeply that, yeah, I might have gotten away with it, but within myself, now I have conflict and I can't be at peace. So, like, that's why those principles, they're like a recipe basically for peace, you know, and it's like the
Right.
more I practice these principles, the more at peace I am. And I don't do
That's
it
right.
perfectly. Trust me. I'm dishonest, you know, screw up. I act impulsively. I do crazy shit.
But it's
So,
definitely a stark improvement from what it once was.
oh my gosh, great, great change.
I've heard it said this way that any reality that you could possibly fathom or imagine for yourself is available to you, but you have to be heading in that direction, right? You can't be making decisions that move in the opposite direction of what you're looking for and expect that you're going to attain what you want, right? You have to be moving in the direction of peace, if peace is what you truly want. You
And
can't
be
say,
willing to do what it takes to get it.
and be willing to do what it takes, right? And so at some level there's self-control and discipline that's involved. But the big thing that you and I have talked about and that I know to be true is you can't really rely on motivation. There has to be some type of disciplined process to where you transfer those daily habits into a routine. It has to be, you have to build, you called it safeguards, but you have to build habitual actions that serve the purpose of moving in the direction of your ideal reality or the life experience that you want. And then stacking those little victories every day. Like you said, maybe it started with an hour of being clean. It started with 24 hours of being clean. And then here it is 9 years later. For some people, it's, I haven't worked out in 20 years and I'm tired all the time. I don't sleep well. I got a freaking inner tube, and I don't mean this derogatory, but I got weight and lumps sticking out of places I don't even want them to be sticking out of. And again, I'm not saying this in a negative way. I'm saying it in an aware way that if when you look at yourself, you're not inspired by the image, or if you're not attracted to the image and that's not the image that you want to portray to the world, then be honest with yourself, step one, about changes that need to be made. And unless you see yourself clearly, another point that you made, addicts have a tendency to be delusional. Well, everyone's delusional at some level, right? It's a kind of, again, another.
Denial. Yeah, it's like, oh, it's not that bad. It's not that bad. But then, you keep going years and it's like, oh shit, it's pretty bad.
I don't see myself clearly. No one sees themselves clearly, right? And so that's a humbling, to use humility, that's a humbling statement, but it's accurate, right? I don't see myself well, but my effort needs to be directed towards every day a little bit better of what? Seeing myself and others in the world around me more clearly.
It's a loving place of humility too, though. I mean, it's like we don't have to beat ourselves up. But
right.
like you're saying, the recognition of, hey, I've let myself get to here. Like I still love myself, but also I would like to improve in these areas.
So that's exactly right. That's a great point made, is that a lot of people look back through those pages of the past and they're trying to place blame somewhere, or they're trying to find fault. Oh, whose fault was that? Was that you, or was it Mr. Johnson, or was it Miss Sally, or was it, was it this person that put that thought in my mind and made me go and use, or maybe do this, that, and no, you don't need to place blame. You don't need to find fault. Simply look back into those pages, observe it, and accept the fact that those things occurred, and attempt to extract a lesson out of it. Attempt to extract something meaningful from it, to say, what purpose did that serve in my life? Sometimes I actually had a little email exchange with someone the other day after a conversation where they said, I feel like I don't have meaning and purpose in my life, and some of the traumatic moments of my life don't have meaning and purpose. And I said, sometimes the meaning and purpose of an incident is simply so you can let someone else know that you have now made it through that, and you just have it as a story to share with them so they know that they can make it through, because they might still be in the thick of it, right? They might still be in the heat of the battle, and you can tell them, hey, look, I went through that and I made it through. And so it gives them even that small amount of hope to say, oh, well, shoot, someone that was born on April Fool's Day, they stayed clean for 9 years. Shit, maybe I can stay clean for 9 years. Something.
It all turns to goal. It turns to goal. I mean, like I've told you before, I mean, even all the things in my life, all the traumatic events in my life, even molestation as a kid, it becomes gold. Because when I'm sharing with a sponsee, or when I'm sharing with another human being, a therapist or whatever, because it's far more common than uncommon. I thought it was so uncommon, I'm the only one. But the reality is it's far more common than uncommon. That's what I've come to understand. But when we talk about it, there's healing.
Yeah.
and they feel safe to know that, oh wow, I'm not the only one. And it, it's so true. It's so true that that's the real gold.
Yep.
And when you relabel it, I mean, that's one of the biggest things is realizing that there's so much value in our trauma. I mean, there's had so many experiences in my recovery where, like, my first recovery relationship was a disaster. I mean, it was an absolute disaster. This relationship was so toxic. It was like the epitome of toxic. And like,
We won't ask you to share any details.
well, it just would, she would come to me, she'd be sharing on me. It was like super toxic and crazy. Like she would even hit me sometimes out of meetings. Like I was like, how could this is so terrible? And it was super traumatic early in recovery. And then like
It's
I
amazing that
did,
you stayed clean with that
oh my goodness,
compounded
serious.
stress and that
Yeah.
compounded, yeah, just
But
harassment.
the trajectory, right? So that was terrible. Yes, it was super traumatic and absolutely terrible. She ended up having a baby with my sponsee, but it changed. It actually woke me up. So I used that tragedy and terrible experience to change the trajectory in my understanding of relationships. So I started reading relationships. Well, I read Relationships for Dummies. That was the first book I read. And then I read probably like 30 books about relationships, and I was, it inspired me to do something positive with it. I took a long time away from relationships, no sex, no nothing, no dating, no nothing, and just worked on myself. It became probably one of the greatest things that ever happened to me.
Sure.
And it's been the truth with all traumatic experiences. Everything in my life that was traumatic has become like I've had value in like fulfillment from all the trauma. And if people are out there struggling with trauma and stuff like that, that transition to becoming and seeing that it's of value and being in a community where it's valuable might be what's missing. Like being with people where it is like you're showing them that you've kind of like come to the other side and it is like a beautiful thing to share, and being able to show them like the value of sharing it with others. It's such a great gift, honestly.
There's a great quote that I love. With the right spirit, every experience is an opportunity for edification.
Mm.
Condemn nothing, which basically means that if you approach life in the right way, regardless of how painful or frustrating or difficult something might seem, don't be angry with it. Don't be mad at it. Don't, be bitter with a person who's difficult in your life. Accept it and understand that every experience, and every means every experience, is an opportunity for us to grow.
Was that in that Anthony DeMello little book, that Love, or was
It's
that one?
not. It's not. That's actually a St. Francis de Sales quote. But
That's what it is. I remember you read that to me before, actually.
yeah. But no, DeMello. Oh, I could quote DeMello all day, baby. But that's for another time. But Karl, I appreciate you, my brother. I am actually looking very forward to hearing more because I know we barely even scratched the surface of some of the things that I feel like my audience and our audience would benefit from hearing, largely to do what you mentioned, which is, right, let them see someone go before them, let them know that
Mm.
those type of experiences are more prevalent than they might have thought, and help them to heal through that process. And I appreciate you being vulnerable and transparent today. I know that there was a little bit of nerves related to it because just a little bit of self-consciousness, because most of the time you're in a controlled space when you share, right? You're in a space
Yeah.
that's in the rooms and kind of it among peers and folks that align with and grapple with a lot of the same struggles that you might have had. And so there's a different relatability there. But I appreciate you taking some of the value and some of the lessons out of there and sharing them here. So thank you again, brother.
Absolutely, man. It's been a pleasure.